So when you're dealing with challenges with other people, I'm always reminding them there's some things you cannot do alone. One thing you cannot do alone, to revisit the metaphor, is you cannot row a lifeboat through the icy waters of the Atlantic by yourself, right? And there's some really fascinating challenges that you're dealing with clients, colleagues, bosses, you name it, that you really aren't going to be able to navigate as skillfully without getting feedback from people that you trust to be emotionally honest with you and objective, because we simply can't see what we prefer not to see about ourselves and our own reactions without perspective.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's show is going to be a great one. Our guest is an executive coach who has worked with clients at all levels on the professional spectrum, from people entering the workforce to Fortune 500 CEOs. She is also the author of Lifeboat, Navigating Unexpected Career Change and Disruption. Maggie Craddock, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Glad to be here.
It's great to have you, and I'm excited about this conversation. We had a quick conversation prior to getting started with the recording, and I just think it's such an appropriate time to be talking about the work you do as well as this most recent book that you've written, because I'm sure many people have felt that they're in their own little lifeboat at times through the last couple of months. But before we get into all of that, Maggie, tell us a little bit about your career journey leading up to this point.
Well, Michael, for many years, I was a portfolio manager on Wall Street, and I was helping people deal with all sorts of different international markets. And I learned a lot about taking risk and dealing with thoughts and emotions under pressure. And one of the main things I learned was what shifts in people's internal world when they're in a high-pressure situation, making a high-stakes decision, as opposed to what's going on when it's business as usual. Because, of course, on a normal day, most of us are pretty logical. We like to think we're kind of strategic. But under pressure, all these emotional triggers can come into the thought process, and you can be prone to polarized thinking and black and white judgments and all of this. And so what I learned for helping people when they're under stress in their lives and careers, and particularly when they're dealing with extraordinary change, is it's not so much any one decision you make. It's having confidence in your decision-making process that's absolutely critical, particularly when you're trying to make wise decisions in a situation where the norms are around you are in flux. And I think that's one of the reasons that I wrote Lifeboat, because, at the human level, what went on with many of the survivors of the Titanic brings up questions that are so close to the ones we face at turning points in business. Like how long will the situation last and how bad will it get? Or, who can I trust to help me survive? And I think for most people, the really poignant one is, how is going through this process going to change me?
Mm-hmm. And this, you've spent a large part of your career thinking about this, working through this, and as you said, having dealt with it yourself in your previous careers. How have you seen this book? Now you've written this book, and we're all going through the effects of COVID-19. How have you seen people reacting to the work that you do, and also the book?
Well, people are reacting to it in an extremely positive manner. I mean, as we discussed before we started the broadcast, the timing for this book has been extraordinary. So many people have even been using the metaphor of the Titanic for unexpected change in the global narrative. But I think what people really come to terms with around this book is the importance of making a shift in mindset. around how we're approaching our careers and our lives when we're going through this period. And, I tell people all the time, it aligns with this idea that we talk about in the book in terms of making a shift from what I refer to as the big ship mindset to more of the lifeboat mindset, right? So when I'm talking about the big ship mindset, I'm not really referring to the size of an organization, because there are a lot of large multinational companies with senior management teams sort of trying to operate according to a lifeboat mindset. What I mean by a big ship mindset is one that's rooted in old norms, right? In what's worked in the past, and potentially stretching those to their limit, because one of the fascinating things about the Titanic story and how it applies to what we're facing in the world today is that ship started having problems long before it spotted any icebergs, right? They were cutting corners and really not being straightforward about all the facts that were unfolding before that ship left port on its maiden voyage. And it was going on its way much quicker than it needed to through icy waters of the Atlantic. But the thing about it is that there were some norms there that were about, remember your part, always play your part and keep your game face on, stay busy, faster's better. And we know that's not always helpful when we're moving too quickly to support our clients. But when we think about the lifeboat mindset, it's about this idea of one moment you're on a ship that literally was heralded as being unsinkable, and you thought everything was fine if you played by the rules. And the next moment, you're huddled together in this tiny watercraft with people that you've never met, fighting for your life. And at a very human level, you realize that what you're dealing with is an environment where you've got more questions than answers. And I really think that's what people are facing in their lives and careers today in terms of changes of how many job opportunities are out there, their working circumstances, the health of their families. And the norms we try to stress for people with a lifeboat mindset are very human ones. Be in the present moment and notice what's going on with other human beings at a very visceral level, right? Deal with unexpected feelings and take strategic pauses. Don't ignore them. Don't suppress them, and do everything you can to pay attention to how you've aligned your thoughts and your feelings and your intentions in the present moment, so you can keep taking small, practical, positive actions that are going to keep you moving in the right direction. This isn't a time to pretend you've got it all figured out. This is a time to try to survive positively and incrementally as we get through this crisis, so you're in the flow of positive opportunities once it abates.
And it's fascinating, the analogy. I mean, it's very accurate to what many, I think, would be. I mean, even you're in a lifeboat with a few others. I mean, that's really what's happened to many in the planet, is we've had to shelter in our homes, with our families. The world's different, and we can't even really go out there to see what's going on in the world. In a way, it can feel like we're limited. I mean, obviously we have the internet, this pipe of information coming in, but it's not a visceral feeling of, I can even go to the car, just go out and drive downtown or somewhere and go about. I mean, there's something about the human aspect of doing that. So we have limited information. We are stuck, and we're forced to be in the situation. And there are, like you say, more questions than answers. The advice that you give to deal with that is very clear. But sometimes it's challenging for people to do the things that they should be doing or that would be best for them to do, keeping calm, staying present. What have you seen with the people that you work with and that are around you, if they have maybe an obstacle in front of them or they're not doing that? How do they recover? Maybe you fell out of the lifeboat and you panicked and you fell out. You thought, I got to jump out of the lifeboat because I think right now that's the thing to do. But wow, that was a mistake.
Oh, that's such a perfect question, Michael, because what everybody's dealing with most of the time under normal circumstances, but it's just amplified with all the different pressures we're under, is inside all of us is a natural tension between the part of us that really wants more self-awareness and hopes to evolve, And the part of us that would really prefer not to know what we'd like not to know about ourselves, thank you very much. I don't really want to change. It would be better for me if you just changed, right? And I went on and reacted any way that I wanted to. And we're forced into this crucible right now where many of us are working from home. And even if we've got a spouse or a family member that's, still going out heroically into the outside world and coming back at the end of the day, we're all dealing with needing to be much more present with one another and in close quarters, in our little bubbles, or as I like to say, in our little lifeboats right now, right? Mm. And so that forces us to deal with the conversations we're having with ourselves. And then, of course, those really vivid questions that we explore in Lifeboat, things like, what are my top priorities in life? And am I doing things in my life right now that are in accord with those priorities? Those things are right in front of us as well. And we talk a lot in the book about confronting something that I refer to as your inner iceberg, right? We've got challenges that you can see the tip of, but they've got these big frozen feelings underneath the surface that we're not necessarily aware of. And those things are bubbling up. And people are really realizing that it's important to actually acknowledge even uncomfortable feelings, because we're not in one of those business as usual situations where you can just suppress something, keep your game face on, and move on smoothly. There are things happening on so many different fronts, and sometimes they're really important that we have to pay attention to them. So when people fall out of the lifeboat, they'll call me and they'll say, Maggie, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I did this. Like somebody will blurt out something on national television they wish they could take back. Wow. Or somebody will hang up on a webinar with their employees because they're so frustrated and they're getting into a power struggle and now they have to worry about what's going to happen when they get back on. Or let's say they're in a really important interview, or they're working with a really important client and they have a central point they want to make and their brain just flatlines and nothing comes out of their mouth. And they'll call me up and they'll go, that wasn't me. And I'll be like, yeah, it was you. It was you. It's a lifeboat learning moment. We can regroup. We can get back in the boat here. But the vital thing is that people now are realizing what they need to do, as opposed to creating a narrative that justifies a dysfunctional reaction, that just justifies freezing or overreacting under pressure. People are in such survival-oriented circumstances, Michael, that they're really thinking about that and learning this vital skill that we talk about in Lifeboat about how to take those strategic pauses in such a way that you're tapping into your feelings. They're part of your strategy, but you're not letting them get you so carried away that you create a narrative to justify them or you let them sink your ship, Mm-hmm. So people are really learning right now that internal career work in terms of how they deal with their feelings, how they figure out what's contributed to the choices they've made in their lives, and when they have those emotional triggers and when they overreact or underreact, embracing those lessons and that inner work is as critical to their success navigating this period as the outer work they do on things like time management, safety precautions, and things such as this.
Mm. It's great. Many of the bookkeeping business owners that I've spoken with over the last couple of weeks, they've experienced an incredible increase in demand for the work that they do because of the situations with getting grants and needing to know the financials quickly and be able to have a game plan for many different businesses, because so many, there's some that are booming in this situation. There's some that are having to reduce staff and shelter staff, that sort of thing. And so there's all these different things happening in all of these businesses. Many bookkeepers will work with multiple businesses, different industries. And so the other aspect is that they're actually having to deal with the emotional impacts as well that owners are faced with, the uncertainty, right? Mm-hmm. So they've been put into this situation and almost the tables being turned, where it's like they're reaching out and trying to, have conversations with their clients, and now the clients are reaching out and wanting to have conversations and wanting to throw get the lifeboat pulled over towards them. So it can also be, I guess, what I'm saying here is that someone who's jumping out of that lifeboat can impact other people around them, the people that were left in the boat, and they can be trying to swim to another boat and climb in. It's like, hey, we got our own problems over here, and you're trying to get into our boat now. So, any advice for how to deal with other people who are perhaps in fear state and going through fear that they have to deal with, have to manage, and really take care of?
Oh, absolutely. Because, as we go through the different stages of the lifeboat process and all the different questions we ask ourselves, such as, when do I get into a lifeboat? Is it time to jump ship? Things like this. We're always getting back to the central shift we talk about when we're making this transition from the big ship mindset to the lifeboat mindset, where it's a really, really human level that we're dealing with in terms of our interactions with people. And we're looking at professional challenges and relationships less in transactional terms and more in human terms, right? So when you're dealing with challenges with other people, I'm always reminding them there's some things you cannot do alone. One thing you cannot do alone, to revisit the metaphor, is you cannot row a lifeboat through the icy waters of the Atlantic by yourself, right? And there's some really fascinating challenges that you're dealing with clients, colleagues, bosses, you name it, that you really aren't going to be able to navigate as skillfully without getting feedback from people that you trust to be emotionally honest with you and objective, because we simply can't see what we prefer not to see about ourselves and our own reactions without perspective. It's vital, we talk about this a lot in the lifeboat process, not to just think about how you're coming across or what your focus is, but how other people feel about themselves after they've interacted with you. And remember that every decision we're all making is not just predicated on the conversations we have with each other. It's predicated on the conversations we have with ourselves, right? After we've been on a webinar call or a phone conversation with people. And so I definitely say to people when they're dealing with all sorts of tricky situations, Michael, not the least of which is the way that you were outlining this question, is you want feedback from other people, not just on what you're doing, but on your ability to be true to yourself under pressure, your decision-making process. When you're dealing with things where the solution is just not something that you haven't been through this before, right? So instead of asking people how you should handle a specific question, you want to find somebody that you trust and respect, that you can ask questions like, do you think I sound like I'm being emotionally honest as I talk about this challenge? Or does it sound like there are feelings I'm burying, right? And I don't want to look at. What are you doing when you're facing a stressful situation to distract yourself from things you prefer not to know? I mean, when do you dissociate? When does your mind wander? When I've dealt with clients for years, they're right on the edge of their seat when I'm talking about body language and what we convey on an open webinar in terms of how people see your confidence in your posture. But they really get a wake-up call when I remind them that the way that they sit, the way they cross their legs, how shallow their breath is, they're constantly communicating with themselves and distracting themselves from things that they prefer to minimize because it's uncomfortable for them. You may want to ask people in some of these interpersonal challenges, do you think my assessment of a difficult person is objective and fair? And if it's not, what am I missing, right? Am I being clear about my own motives in a tricky situation? Because also, when it's business as usual, again, we're pretty logical. We can, sort of compartmentalize feelings and keep on going, and it's okay. But when we're under extreme pressure, particularly when we're working remotely, our reactions to things like the time it takes for someone to get back to us, their inflection, their vocal tone, even what they look like, can trigger some kind of emotional memory that threads into that narrative we're creating for ourselves. It taps into that inner iceberg that's under the surface. And before you know it, we're not in that lifeboat mindset where we're in the present moment, right? We've been swept away by the undertow of something in the past. And so this is a very helpful process for people doing the internal work they need to do to stay clear and present, so that when they're making these important choices in their external world, they're making strategic ones.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think the fact that often people will try and row the boat across the Atlantic by themselves. And so that in itself
so true.
is a reminder there's very few things that can be done greatly on our own, and we can get to greatness so much more quickly and effortlessly if we ask for the right help, and often from people that we've built relationships with and trusting relationships with. So I love that aspect of thinking about the feedback and getting that feedback, because our actions are often, we're doing them out of just behavior. And so how do our behaviors, we don't see how that's impacting people. But if we ask for feedback, we can get that and then make adjustments to have a better outcome. And, when we do these little tiny things, the day goes a lot more smoothly, and that's energy spent elsewhere.
And you just said something that I think prompts another important dimension to your question, Michael. I've done a lot of research on different types of clients over the years and how they respond to different situations. And while this also applies to men, I will say predominantly women business owners and senior executives that are female that I've worked with definitely fall into what you just said, the I can row the boat alone mindset. And it's difficult for them sometimes to set the boundaries they need, not only with other people, but in their own internal thought process, right? So that they give themselves the room and the space they need to actually sort through the thought process that's led them to where they are, sort through the feelings they're having independently, right? Because many high-performing senior women that I've worked with are so busy wearing all these different hats, trying to be a good enough wife, a good enough mother, a good enough board member, a good enough date, right? That they can lose track of the room they need in their internal world to really sort through things, because they're so urgently focused on meeting the needs of others, particularly at a time, of course, when everyone's needs are feeling a little urgent, right?
Mm. Good advice. And it has me think of someone that I've spoken, a woman that I've spoken with recently, who literally shut her business down, closed everything off for a day or two. I believe it was 2 days, and literally spent the time going through and looking at everything that was happening, what promises were made, what's outstanding, where am I at, what is my plan going forward, how am I dealing with this, how am I processing this, and then came out the other side much more clear, much more balanced and ready to start rowing the boat. And of course, got help. I mean, that was the call that she made to me about getting feedback and bouncing ideas and that sort of thing. And so I think people, and I would say women have that in much more powerful, well, perhaps they listen to their intuition more clearly. Some of the things that we've talked about in the past with other guests around intuition and listening to intuition is to know and listen to that intuition when it's saying, hey, you know what, it's time to pump the brakes, slow down, and take care of yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And when you talk about that woman reaching out to you for feedback, some of the questions we were talking about previously about turning to people and asking them something as vulnerable as, do I sound like I'm being emotionally honest, or are there feelings I might be suppressing? Here's the thing. I've had a lot of people say, Maggie, I just don't know if I could be that transparent with someone. That feels a little awkward. I've had that game face on for a long time. But here's what happens even more of the time. Other people will call me and say, Maggie, someone in that professional networking group reached out to me for this lifeboat feedback you were talking about. And at the end of the conversation, they thanked me. And I said, no, thank you, right? Because giving people that kind of feedback on a personally empowering choice they've made, Michael, like somebody choosing to take a couple of days off, which is really sacred time, right? And just be present with themselves and sort things through. I'm sure that you felt that was liberating for you too, to engage in that kind of discourse with someone, because it creates that real tone of being present and authentic with another person at a human level, as opposed to these parts we play like we can just keep on going while all these things are building up underneath the surface. I think that's at the heart, establishing that kind of rapport of what we're trying to talk about when we make the shift to lifeboat-style relationships.
You mentioned emotional agility.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, when we're communicating with other people, right? I'm always saying that I invite my clients all the time to reflect on two key acronyms. One of them I call WAIT, W-A-I-T, WAIT. Why am I talking? But I think the even more powerful one, particularly in times of unprecedented change, is HAIL, H-A-I-L. How am I listening? Am I listening to solve a problem? Am I listening to wait for them to take a breath so I can insert my thoughts? Am I listening to act superior and one-up them and mention something that I noticed that they might not have seen yet? Or am I listening to truly understand? And listening to truly understand means really trying to get a vantage point on the emotional perspective that someone has on a situation which could be quite different from your own, which goes a long way to helping people understand how they're evaluated as leaders. You know, leaders are always saying, why would people want to follow me? I'm like, it could depend. It's different things for different people. Or why do people feel a sense of belonging in my organization? I don't know. We have to get down to the specifics, right? And so in many situations in my life, as people know, I've done a lot of research for Harvard on various power styles, and I've dealt with military commanders who really praise and respect people who can command authority and discipline. I've dealt with spiritual leaders who have great empathy and compassion. I've dealt with entrepreneurs who are absolutely visionary about new ideas. But the thing that always comes down to every single power style is that it's relational. And when you understand the emotional roots of different power styles, then you understand how you can operate from the strengths of many of them and minimize the blind spots of most of them. So one of the things we talk about in Lifeboat is we actually look at individuals on these lifeboats in the Titanic and how their relationship with themselves and others changed over time. And one of my favorite examples is Margaret Brown, and I think they wrote a musical about her, The Unsinkable Molly Brown. But she gets on one of these lifeboats, and these very commanding guys who have the role that they've been assigned freeze and get into a power struggle under pressure. And she starts employing all these different power styles in the present moment that are representative of a whole range of things. And she's relating to people by anticipating their needs and offering words of kindness. She's relating to people strategically by putting them two to an oar when they can't manage things on their own. She ends up becoming very commanding at the end because when Robert Hitchens threatens to throw her overboard, if she tries to keep these women alive and warm and he refuses to go back for survivors, she literally says, we're going to throw you overboard if you don't stop with the pessimism. And when we look at this example, we see an individual who has not necessarily sought their way to greatness cognitively with any idea or mental strategy. They've really looked for what's unfolding in the present moment and aligned themselves with the needs at a human level of a wide variety of people. And in so doing, greatness found them.
Wow. What a story.
Oh, I love the story. Absolutely love the story.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And I think it speaks to the gifts that people have. Every one of our listeners have unique gifts. We are all given gifts. And when the call comes, the more we can just allow our gifts to come forth, likely the more powerful it will be for the outcome.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And I think it also begs one of the points that I like to make in the book a lot, which is when we're creating firms, when we're running organizations, whether we're leading them or whether we are the, informal leaders and we're just operating in such a way that we're trying to set a tone that inspires unity in people around us, we really, particularly under these types of circumstances, want to think about what I call making a shift from the self-help mindset to the us-help mindset. And by that, I mean, the self-help mindset, and it's really understandable. We're all just absolutely terrified about what's going to unfold next. But the self-help mindset is really about our personal evolution, our personal security, how we are advancing and growing as individuals. And of course, when a whole bunch of people are operating from that mindset, it can feel like we're all alone together, right? Mm. as opposed to the us help mindset where we realize that we can't row that boat alone, right? We need the diversified strengths and skills of a wide variety of other people, and we need their perspective for what our blind spots are under pressure, right? So that we can, course correct and adapt when necessary, when things around us are all in a state of flux. And the S-Help mindset is always about balancing your strengths and your progress with the greater good of others. That doesn't mean lowering your bar for excellence, but it means changing your sense of how you achieve that from sort of a zero-sum game where I win, you lose, to things like understanding we're building a bigger conversation. We're improving the industry. We're helping our clients. We're doing things that are adding value for the greater good, because it's not about dominance right now. It's about how we continue, how we improve things, and how we evolve.
Amazing. And you mentioned something that I wanted to bring up as well inside of that, which was the hail. I love the hail.
Thank you.
Not the kind that falls on your car and does damage. But how am I listening? And listening for understanding. And I think that's often not practiced because of we're all busy, right? We're busy doing things, and we've got, can be very transactional. I need this, I need that, I need to get there, I need to do this. And can cause a lack of connection with people, a lack of understanding of what's happening with people, and a real dangerous place of making assumptions about why people are doing things. And I see that come up often in our community in the work that they do with small business owners, is that business owners are busy and often are not applying hail, and so I think our listeners are really positioned well to be great, and are in many cases great listeners, but listening, remembering to listen for that understanding, because even in times like this, the heightened emotions and the heightened, we don't see the, 4 or 5 other dominoes that perhaps fell on that particular day that has left them in a conversation where someone's maybe a heightened level of urgency around something, or concern, or saying things that maybe don't sound right, or are perhaps could be perceived as being disrespectful or unfriendly. Because business owners are going through an incredible amount of stress in some situations. And so listening for understanding is a way to disarm that.
Oh, absolutely. Because, as a coach, when I'm taking the time to have a dialogue with somebody, of course, they've enlisted me as a professional, not necessarily to listen to what I have to say, but to train them in the art of listening to themselves more carefully, right? Because that's really the name of the game. My job is not to tell people what to do. My job is to train them to listen to themselves more carefully, because only you know what's authentic for you, right? So we're taking those blocks away. But when we take this concept of hail and we go back to what we were talking about earlier, Michael, about those big ship rules, those old norms. Well, I think innocently enough, many of us have internalized this conditioning, right, to play our part and to stay busy, and sometimes for the most positive of reasons, so that we appear to be productive, we're adding value, we're giving our employers everything we can, right? So we're busy all the time, we're overscheduled. And then, of course, because of many of the machinery that we've got, some of us have been operating at a mechanical pace rather than a human pace, and this idea that faster is better. But the fascinating thing about making the shift to the lifeboat mindset is when we get back to some of the most powerful things about being human, we realize that it is so important to be present, to take our time, and to listen to what someone is saying, but to try to get to what's underneath those words. What they might not yet be able to fully articulate, but with a little time, they'll get there, right? That's the important thing. And when we can help someone come to the point that they go from what's sort of like a vague feeling, what's keeping them kind of stuck or frozen, what's preventing them from taking meaningful risks on their own behalf, or being able to figure out the relational challenge at the heart of a problem so they can, solve it productively for their organization, potentially their industry, right? what's getting people stuck is often they've been moving so quickly and they've trained themselves to suppress those feelings for so long that they can't really get a handle on exactly the exact nature of how their thoughts and feelings are working together. It's just kind of like a feeling of stuck, right?
Mm.
And when we can get underneath that, and people can get a handle on what that is, and particularly come to the point that in a way that they can express themselves in a way that fortifies their personal integrity rather than diminishing it, because I never really believe in these things coming out explosively. That's never helpful, and we could do a whole podcast on that. But when you start getting to the exact nature of what's going on, and you can articulate it in a way that's motivational, you're not only shifting your culture, you're shifting your own brain chemistry, right? You're taking some of that suppressed stuff from that inner iceberg and making it more conscious above the surface where you can work with it and take positive, productive action.
Lovely. Some fantastic thoughts and as well actions that our listener can take through these turbulent waters while they're in the lifeboat or helping others in their lifeboats. You've written this book. It sounds like a fascinating book, and I highly recommend our listeners get that book. You also mentioned some other recommended reading, books that you have read and that you cherish. I'd love for you to share some of those with our listeners as well.
Well, we were discussing the E-Myth before we started this conversation. I think that's really a terrific book. And also, one of the books that I wrote prior to writing Power Genes that I think is really helpful for people right now is a book called The Authentic Career. And that's also published by New World Library. And that really helps people articulate how things that they may have been conditioned to internalize about their beliefs for success and what work meant to them in their family system could be extremely helpful. And then another book that I think is just a classic for people who are dealing with creativity and unblocking themselves is that famous book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. I've always been a huge fan of that one.
Fantastic book and powerful if you do the exercises as well. This has been fantastic. I highly recommend our listeners, as I said, pick up a copy of Lifeboat, and of course we'll have a link to where you can get that book. And Maggie, is there any other link or area that if people were interested in learning more about you and the work that you do, where they could find you most effectively?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Michael. You can find me on my website, workplacerelationships.com. That's all one word, plural. You can also find me under Maggie Craddock on LinkedIn or at Maggie Craddock on Twitter.
Beautiful. And we'll put those links into the show notes as well. Maggie, thank you so much for doing this for us, for the listener, and I really appreciated having you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
Beautiful. And with that, we wrap another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's wonderful guest and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.